If you turn the page, you'll come to the first challenge, which is a challenge having to do with 5-finger scales or pentascales. And the student, to the accompaniment of the MIDI orchestration, has to go through in rhythm all the 5-finger scales, and you notice that there is a color scheme, and it follows this color scheme. We start with C and G because they're one color, then we go to D and A because they each have a black key in the middle, and then we right away go to D flat and A flat, which is where the colors are mirrored, the colors are reversed. So you can see how that works. If you go to challenge 2, you see a similar kind of plan. Now the color scheme changes a bit because we're dealing with triads. So our first group of triads will be C, F, and G because they're all one color. And then we throw G flat into the mix because that's also one color. It's the color mirror of G. And I hope you begin to see the logic. The second group I like to call the lemonade group, and I very specifically insisted that they be A, D, and E simply because the mnemonic lemonade is so helpful. A, D, and E all have one black key in the middle, and then right away go to A flat, D flat, and E flat, and you've got the color opposite. So I hope this all becomes clear to you as you look at it. And finally, a fourth section, which is a little bit the culmination, is some repertoire in which you find pieces which focus on one specific issue. Ups and downs, focuses on the C scale, and as we progress through the different levels, there will be pieces for every major scale, every minor, not every minor scale in this particular instance, just the major scales. A piece for different chord combinations. So you've got skipping to number 3, Boogaloo is a little piece that uses C, F, and G. A Mighty Fifthful, number 2 there, our second example, is focuses on just fifths. By the way, I think it's a very interesting and challenging thing when the student studies these pieces, each one of which is kind of a puzzle to unravel, that they try to create pieces on their own using these pieces as models. If you study A Mighty Fifthful a little carefully, you'll notice that fifths on the keyboard are always one color: C to G, D to A, E to B, C sharp to G sharp, or D flat to A flat if you prefer to call it by its enharmonic name. Always one color, except for the notorious combination of B and F. When you have a B on the bottom, you've got an F sharp on top. If you've got a B flat on the bottom, you have an F. So that's the only place where a fifth is not one color. And so if you study Mighty Fifthful a little closely, you'll see that in fact it is underlining this keyboard logic. So there you have it. In a nutshell. It's kind of a big nutshell, but I hope enough to give you some clear idea of what these materials are about. Now, just one or two thoughts about the pedagogic, because this is so important. I've heard many teachers say that playing with the MIDI files, if they do it at all, is sort of like icing on the cake. It's just a little something you add at the end. I don't agree with that at all. I think that playing with accompaniments is one of the most important skills that a student needs to develop, and furthermore, the accompaniments are the best metronome that you can find, but a whole lot more interesting and fun than just hearing tick, 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 tick. You've got real music, but it's very rhythmically designed, and the student has to keep a very strict rhythm and listen not only to him or herself, but to listen to the music. Now, if the preparation is not done carefully, this can lead to frustration. Do not attempt to play with the orchestration up to tempo until readiness is complete. Work up to the tempo gradually with only the solo. Having been through George Litterst's tutorial on how to use Home Concert Xtreme, I hope you understand that it's very simple to separate the solo from the orchestration. Introduce the orchestration only when a tempo, which is at least close to the default tempo, has been reached. Be very careful not to introduce the orchestration prematurely, because it can throw the student off, and instead of being a joyful experience, it becomes a frustrating experience. Now finally, there are two more samples of MIDI files. One is a little piece called Fifth, so that's from a collection of mine called Declarations of Independence. Each piece in that collection focuses on some different issue having to do with separating the right hand from the left hand, a very critical issue sort of in the very late elementary, early intermediate stages. And then there's another piece called Quite Contrary from a collection of mine with a rather silly title, I'm afraid, called Etudes Brutus. Little etudes to underline the fact that a finger exercise or an etude should be a musical experience and sound beautiful. So those two collections, Declarations of Independence and Etudes Brutus, address technical issues, but trying always to make lovely music. Both of these collections, by the way, are published by Carl Fischer. And then finally, there are just a few samples from which we call Classics Revisited, which are some orchestrations of little classical pieces. These can be found in many different collections. The collections from which these were taken are also collections which Phyllis Lehrer and I compiled and edited and were published by Carl Fischer. They're called More Classics, Romantics, and Moderns. There are four volumes of these. Let me conclude this by saying that if you are interested in hearing more of my music and more of the MIDI files, you can very simply go to my webpage, paulsheftel.com, and go to publications, and I have recorded just about everything I've written, so you might find that of interest. So thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure to visit with you, and you can be in touch with me, psheftel@aol.com, if you have questions that you'd like to discuss with me. Many thanks.